Welcome back. Now we've made this character state enum variable, and our anim instance has one called character state, and our /character has one called character state as well. And we define this enum first in the character class, but then we decided to make our own header file for it called character types and define it there. And then we can simply include that anywhere we're using it. And this allows us to avoid needing to include /character here in /animinstance.h. And we're updating this in native update animation. So the animation blueprint always knows the character state on the character because we made a public getter for it. But the thing is, we want to use this in the animation blueprint. So we need to expose this to blueprints. So we can simply give it a U property and expose it. We'll give it a U property and give it blueprint read only. That way we can read the variable from blueprints. And if we like, we can give it a category. And it's sort of related to movement, but we can also give it a subcategory. If we say movement and then use this character, which is sort of half of the logical OR, right, that vertical line, then we can put it in the category of character state. Now this gives us a subcategory. Let's see what this looks like in blueprints. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control F5 and compile and launch. All right, so we can go back into our animation blueprint and see if we can access the character state. Now I'm here in ground locomotion in the idle state. And if I right click and type character state, then we see the movement category, and in movement we have character state and get character state. Now it'd be nice if we can see our exposed variables. And in the My Blueprint panel, there's the variables section, but this only shows us the variables we created in blueprints. We also created some variables in the parent C++ class, /anim instance. We can see those if we want to by clicking the gear and checking Show Inherited Variables. And now we see different variables here. We have a /anim instance section. That's because our /character doesn't have a category, so it goes into /anim instance. We also have movement, where we have our character movement component, ground speed, and is falling. And then we have a second movement, which has a subcategory character state. So it didn't actually go into the other movement category. So if we don't like that, we could change the category, but it's not the biggest of deals. We do have the character state, and we can even drag it in and get it. We can't get a setter because we made it blueprint read only, so set character state is grayed out, but we can get it there. And alternatively, we could right click and type character state and use get character state from here. Now that's how we get the character state. Now in order to check it, we can check it in a number of ways. We could drag off of it and use things like comparison operators. We could use double equals, and there's an equal enum operator. If we select that, we can check to see if it's equal to one of the states. And notice it's showing these states according to our display names from that umeta enum macro. So we don't see ECS unequipped, we see simply unequipped. So that's that display name at work there. Now we have two poses. We have one where we're holding a weapon and one where we're not. And what we'd like to do is pick one of those poses depending on our character state. Now here's how we can do that. We can right click and type blend poses by eCharacter state. And we get this blend poses eCharacter state. Now this is a special type of node that returns a pose. We can plug it into output animation pose, and it takes a default pose. But if we right click on this, we can add a pin for the different possible values of eCharacter state. And look, it takes an enum value, and we can take character state and plug that in. So blending poses can check the value of character state, and it can return a different pose depending on that state. So if I right click on default pose and add a pin for unequipped, we'll now have an input pose for unequipped. And if I right click and select equipped one-handed weapon, then we have a pose for that. So if I plug idle straight into unequipped and standing idle retargeted into equipped one-handed weapon, then this node will check the value of character state. And if it's equal to the unequipped state, then it'll return the unequipped pose. And if it's equal to the equipped one-handed weapon pose, it'll return the standing idle retargeted pose because that's what's going into that input. Now, if it's not either of those states, then it would default to the default pose. So if we don't have anything plugged into default pose, then if our character state was not one of these two states, then we wouldn't get any pose. The character would kind of go back to the A pose. So it's usually a good idea to have a default pose there. We could take our idle and duplicate it with Control D and just have that plugged into default pose just in case we don't have a valid character state, or we could leave it empty, and then we would definitely know if we have an invalid character state because the character would A pose. I'm going to leave this as is for now. Now notice we have an unequipped blend time and an equipped one-handed weapon blend time. This seems to imply that when we're changing into one of the other poses, then there's a blend involved. We don't just snap into that other pose, we smoothly blend into it. And this time is a measure of how smoothly we blend from one pose to another. How long does it take for that blend to happen? So we can experiment with different values here. So I'm going to compile, and notice we get this blue line down here. And in the compiler results, it says default pose was visible but ignored. So it's telling us there is a possibility that we'll be in a state where we don't have pose data, and we would see if that happened. So let's go back to test map and press play. Now, we know that our character state starts off at unequipped, and as soon as we equip a weapon, on the character class, we set it to equipped one-handed weapon. And our anim instance is updated every frame according to the character's character state, as we're using that public getter to get its value. So let's go pick up a weapon with the E key, and look at that. We've changed into our new idle state, and we're actually holding the weapon. And we can run around, and everything looks great. So now we have the ability to change that idle pose. We're in the regular idle pose, and if we pick up a weapon, we change and we're actually holding the weapon, and everything looks awesome. So this is great. We now know how to blend poses based on an enum. Now, just so that we have something hooked up to default pose, I'll go ahead and hook up the idle there and compile. And before we wrap this up, why don't we play with some of these blend times a bit? Now, we never get out of the equipped one-handed weapon character state, so we'll never blend back into the regular idle pose. So really, we can just play with the blend time for equipped one-handed weapon. Now let's see what happens if we set this to 1 and compile and go and pick up a weapon. I'm going to hit E, and look at that. It's blending very slowly. So that's what that blend time does. If we lower it to about 0.5 and go pick up a weapon, we'll see what this looks like. So still pretty slow. And if we set this to 0, then there won't be any blend. So I set it to 0. Let's go and pick up a weapon now. And she snaps, and that's not very natural. So it's generally a good idea to have a non-zero value here. And I encourage you to play with this until you get it just right. I'm going to leave it at 0.1 because 0.1 is quick, but it's not a snap. It's just a nice, quick way to change to an animation pose without snapping, and it looks great. And this pose looks awesome. She's breathing hard, she's ready for combat, and she's holding that weapon, and everything looks great. Now, there is an issue, though. As soon as we start running, well, the hand isn't actually holding the weapon anymore. It's just the regular unequipped running animation. So we'd like to have some more animations, and that way we can switch our running animation depending on the weapon that we have equipped. So great job. We now know how to switch poses based on a variable of enum type. And as we update that enum, we can choose which poses our character can have to be more appropriate based on the weapons we've equipped or whether our character is unequipped. Great job. We'll continue with this in the next video. I'll see you soon.